Aardman Animation have bestowed onto humankind the good word. In fact, after 20 long years, the chickens shall runneth once again amongst us. Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome back to Buzzcuts, a channel where we bring you fascinating film facts through an offbeat lens. You guys probably heard on, I think it was the 26th of April, after 18 years since the original Chicken Run. To this day, by the way, the highest grossing stop-motion animated film came out. And since that time, distributors and other studios, and I'm sure lots of folks in the industry have been asking, where is the sequel? How is it that in this particular niche medium, the absolute top grossing film by a massive margin never got a sequel? And if you look at like the top 15 highest grossing stop motion animated films, basically Aardman and Laika, who's based in the States, they kind of own the bulk of them. 5 of the top 15 films are Aardman's, including first, second, and fourth place. 4 are Laika, all 4 films that they've ever released theatrically, and the rest are kind of a smattering of mostly Tim Burton projects from various studios, and at this point Wes Anderson now. And it's not really tons of money when you compare it to like Pixar's biggest successes like Ratatouille, I think, which was 600+ million. So that dwarfs Chicken Run. But again, with Chicken Run at the time, we're talking about, you know, a pretty small English studio that coming off of the Wallace and Gromit short films and some television series and making something that I don't think anyone expected to do the kind of numbers that it did. Sort of the original flagship feature of the most renowned, and even there being petitions out there. This news kind of came as a surprise to me. I guess more than anything just because, like everyone else, I'm thinking if this was going to happen, it would have happened a long time ago. Now, there's no official release date for this movie, but they've said that they're doing it after the film that they're working on now, so it's presumably already well into development, but they haven't actually started production. And so the best guess is that it wouldn't hit until 2020, which would make it literally 20 years after the original Chicken Run. If you're not familiar with Chicken Run, what are you doing sitting there? Go watch it, even if you're not into animation or family films. It's essentially like a very self-aware, astute, hilarious, and just really perfectly well done. And I'm not trying to make a cooking chicken pun there, but it's just a very well done interpretation essentially of The Great Escape. It's sort of a remake of The Great Escape with claymation chickens. Quite sure that that was actually very real inspiration and reference material, but I mean, it's not to say that it's literally that exact same story. The characters are very original and memorable and unique in their own right, and the story has some nice twists and turns. And if you combine that with the actual animation quality, it's not hard to see why it was the most successful stop-motion animated film to date. In fact, I haven't watched it in years, but I've seen clips, and just when the story came out, you know, stuff about the original started resurfacing, and I'm kind of blown away at just how well the original Chicken Run has stood the test of time. Of course, there's a bunch of claymation films that are a little more polished because they've used computer enhancements essentially to clean up aspects of the animation. And then on the other hand, of course, there's very traditionally done claymation films with almost no computer enhancements that are more detailed than Chicken Run. And frankly, I think there's a lot of stop motion films that I prefer the stories and the writing in them. I don't think Chicken Run is, you know, the ultimate bastion of claymation storytelling, although it is really, really just damn well written and directed. But what I'm getting is I don't think that there's been a film since Chicken Run that actually has better character animation, the stuff that really matters, the things that bring those characters to life, and also just how smooth and fluid the animation is, how natural it comes together, how cleanly cut and edited it is, and just how it visually flows. The lighting, the cinematography, all that stuff is just like really fantastic. I mean, I would happily watch Chicken Run all day with no audio and just, you know, take in all the eye candy. It really is that good. With all that said, even from an animation standpoint, it's probably not personally my favorite Aardman film. I guess the reason why I'm kind of surprised that they are making this sequel, besides the long delay, is because I guess I feel like everything that Aardman makes that is a feature production, you know, they do a lot of commercial work, they do shorts, they're not shy of basically taking any kind of work, it seems, not to hold it against them, but I get the sense that they do all of that work, you know, the Chevron commercials and crap like that, more as a way to sustain themselves so that they can work on these incredible kind of feature labor of love productions that just take, you know, years and years and years of hard work. And certainly like Nick Park and the other kind of original creators at Aardman, you know, I really believe that their features are passion projects essentially. At the end of the day, you know, it's not to say that they don't build them to be profitable and count on them being profitable, but I really get the sense that they choose the projects that they choose because they keenly believe in it. And Chicken Run, I kind of feel like, was very much an isolated project. To me, it was sort of a story that you would tell once, and I guess I just personally never felt the need in particular to revisit those characters or that environment in a different story, or you know, to continue that story. And I guess I just sort of always assumed that the folks at Aardman felt the same way. With all that said, Aardman has always made films that, you know, have a lot of kind of crossover. In fact, there's not really a lot of projects that they're notable for that are just single standalone projects. I mean, there's Flushed Away, there's Pirates, stuff like that. But I mean, they're best known for, you know, Creature Comforts, which is a television series, and their spin-off shorts. There's Wallace and Gromit, which is, you know, 4 shorts that are pretty long shorts plus a feature film, and then Shaun of the Sheep is their other kind of big franchise. And so whether or not you like sequels, you can never say that Aardman Animation has shied away from creating them. But the timing's also kind of interesting because the next film from Aardman is going to be Shaun the Sheep Farmageddon, they're calling it, which maybe that's why they're releasing Chicken Run right after, is because maybe Shaun the Sheep is sort of almost the gateway to the next Chicken Run movie. Shaun the Sheep has had more exposure recently with shorts and television content and is probably more recognizable among kids these days, and you know, they're both farm related. There could be some crossover there, even in terms of the characters and the environment, if they wanted to. I don't think that they're gonna take it that literally, but maybe they see, you know, if they can show, for instance, a trailer to a new Chicken Run movie at the end of Farmageddon, another claymation farm movie that presumably will do quite well at the box office, that could be a win-win. But it's kind of strange for the same reason, because they're kind of putting all their eggs in one basket, to make another horrible chicken pun. It might seem kind of shallow just to compare these films at the bare surface level, you know, in terms of the atmosphere, the setting, the raw aesthetics of them. But I think that actually matters a lot, and probably matters in family entertainment and kids films more than anything else. What actually probably draws the audience in is the subject matter. And I think nothing proves this point more than, you know, Disney Pixar's Cars, for instance. Disney Pixar isn't particularly known for sequels. You know, they've made a few in their time. I think if you ask most adults, Cars would rank lower in terms of, you know, the quality, the benchmark that Pixar has set. And yet, if you count Cars and Planes, it has more sequels than pretty much any other franchise that they've worked on. And it's probably also spawned the most kind of spin-offs and mockbusters and copycats. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's because, frankly, there's a lot of kids who love Cars. You combine two things that kids love, Cars and animation or cartoons, and you're just that much more likely to have a success right out the door. It's marketing at the end of the day. And for that reason, I think it's kind of rare that you see studios do that, where without actually having a recent success based on a particular environment or kind of world or character, that they, you know, produce a bunch of movies at the same time. It would kind of be like Pixar making Cars and Planes simultaneously and just assuming that they would both be a success. And as much as animal films are sort of a perennial family category or subgenre, I feel like it's not its trendiest at the moment. There really hasn't been a big theatrical kind of animal family film in a long time. And I kind of feel like the animal franchises that are really thriving out there, and most of them are not theatrical, but they strike a much lighter tone. It almost seems like they're for a younger audience, whereas the stuff that's for a slightly older child or family audience, or at least strikes kind of a slightly darker tone, has subsided to some extent. I mean, if you just compare like the mood and the atmosphere of things like Homeward Bound and Beethoven, or, you know, Shiloh, Babe, or I'm trying to think of animated examples, you know, like Fox and the Hound, stuff like that, to kind of the more contemporary, like Santa Buddies, kind of the Air Buddies generation. And I don't know, maybe I'm completely out of touch, but it seems like that subgenre exists for a completely different purpose now. And maybe that's why there's not as many kind of farm-centric movies, and certainly not as many about animals that are destined to be slaughtered and eaten. It's just because, you know, it almost seems like somebody has identified that the audience isn't there for that content so much. But now with Aardman betting again on both of these films at the same time, it kind of makes me wonder, like, either did Aardman or were there executives who are funding these movies who did some kind of market research and determined that, you know, that there really is a market for this again, or are they really just betting on the success of these two individual franchises to bring in an audience regardless of the subject matter. I just kind of find it interesting that like even Pixar and Disney haven't made as many animal films recently. And if you look at that early kind of 2000s period when Chicken Run came out, this is something that I haven't really seen a lot of people talk about, but like there were so many, not just animal movies, but like actually farm movies where it was there was a bubble there, it really feels like, especially in the animation world. I don't know whether it was based on, again, market research at that point in time, or if everyone was just sort of jumping on the bandwagon based on the success of films like Babe and Chicken Run. But for example, if you look at Disney animated fare between 2004 and 2006, almost all of them were not just animal movies, but were actually set in a farm setting, and a lot of them included chickens. And it sort of makes me doubt that it was just coincidence. Now, with one exception, none of those were particularly successful, and that sort of seems like that really did it for that subgenre for a long time. And maybe that's why we haven't seen a lot of farm animals since. Disney really overspent that genre and, just sort of exhausted the audience of that particular category. So the films I'm talking about from Disney are like Home on the Range, which was one of their last 2D animated, I guess their third last 2D traditional stop-motion animated feature, compared to Winnie the Pooh and Princess and the Frog were the other two last ones, unless I'm forgetting any. But it was their first 2D animated feature that really flopped, I think, and at least in a long time, at least in decades. And then we had Valiant, we had Barnyard, of course, in 2006, and we had another chicken movie, Chicken Little, in 2005. And of those, I think Chicken Little was the only one that really did commercially well for Disney, but pretty much all of those were critically panned. And I actually haven't seen Chicken Little, but I kind of feel like most people just want to forget it. Certainly compared to something like Chicken Run that is now revered as this incredible classic animated film, you certainly can't imagine Disney making a Chicken Little sequel at this point. Maybe like a direct-to-video movie or something. So if you compare that to now, like I'm struggling to think of any kind of mainstream release from Disney or Pixar or DreamWorks or anyone else that again is sort of in that realm. As much as fans of animation and Aardman, love it and remember Chicken Run, I kind of feel like in the general consciousness, certainly in the States, it doesn't have the same brand power as other movies that demonstrated the same kind of box office power initially. I could be wrong about that. I kind of hope I am wrong, and I imagine that, it'll certainly make back whatever it costs regardless, even just in, the European and the foreign market. But whether or not it's a box office success in the States, I think will really come down to how much Aardman is able to draw in an audience that doesn't remember the original. In other words, I think they can't really lean too much on that, and they have to just make a film that has as much appeal as an original property as it does a sequel. So I kind of wonder whether this will be a true sequel or if it will be more of a remake. And again, a 20-year gap is huge, especially when you're talking for children's films, for family films. I mean, you're going to have people who maybe saw the original as children now bringing their kids to it. It's that sort of long ago. Again, it's traditional remake territory. It's not sequel territory. You're not going to have people who saw the original as kids and are still young enough to kind of watch it with that same childlike excitement and newness, I guess, for lack of a real word. And maybe that's part of their strategy, and the timing is that they're realizing that Chicken Run now has like a nostalgic power to it. Now, again, this news is very, very new. It's very recent, but so far everything is coming together the way that I think any fan would hope in terms of the team that's behind it. Unfortunately, we don't have Nick Parker or any of the original Aardman founders. That might be a little bit worrying. I mean, they're on as executive producers, obviously, and they're supportive of the project. They're not directly involved creatively. However, we do have the original writers returning, Jaron O'Farrell and Kerry Kilpatrick. And Kerry Kilpatrick has penned numerous animated movies besides Chicken Run, and they've really proven their ability to weave a great story. We have Sam Fell as director, who did not direct the original Chicken Run, but he did direct Flushed Away and Paranorman. And I know a lot of folks don't like Flushed Away, and I can understand. You came to Aardman as a fan of stop motion. The CGI is not nearly as nice to look at, but in terms of the actual character development, the writing, and the dialogue, it's really strong. Sam Fell deserves a lot of credit for bringing that to life as well. And despite Flushed Away being CGI, the way the characters are so quintessentially Aardman, I think a lot of that credit as well goes to Sam Fell in just recognizing how those characters had to be realized visually on screen. So for me, it's just a fact that neither Peter Lord nor Nick Park are directing or producing directly. That is maybe concerning, if anything is. But the other interesting thing about, Chicken Run and the age it is and the age that Aardman is that I'm guessing that a lot of the folks who are at that studio now, which will be much, much bigger than it was probably in the early 2000s, never worked on that movie. And for them, it will be sort of a calling card for Aardman, and maybe it was one of the things that inspired inspired them to seek out, you know, a career in stop motion animation, let alone a job specifically at Aardman. So I almost feel like it'll be new and fresh to a lot of the hands that are physically working on it. And that probably will only be a good thing. I think if these movies were made back to back, you know, you're gonna get more people that become sort of cynical about the whole idea of a sequel and maybe are a little tired with that world and that universe. For us, it's only 2 hours on screen, but for people who are working on it, it might be like 2 or 3 years of their lives, right? Depending on their role. So a 20-year break from that perspective could only be a good thing, and having lots of fresh faces and folks working on it also could be a good thing, whether those are producers or directors or the individual modelers and animators. And again, as many commercial projects as Aardman works on, I think they continue to demonstrate that they're not purely motivated by money and that they really continue to innovate and take chances. And to that point, another recent announcement from Aardman Animation was 1111 Retold, which isn't a film at all, and I think that's why it demonstrates that Aardman is still willing to take chances. Not a lot of information is available yet, but 1111 is a highly narrative-centric, kind of indie-level World War I video game created by Digix Art in collaboration with Aardman. Presumably Aardman is doing sort of more of the art direction and possibly some of the narrative and writing design, and Digix Art is doing the actual gameplay mechanics and development, and it's being produced by none other than Bandai Namco, so it's going to have probably a pretty significant release as well for the scale of the project. And although I think it's on a much smaller scale, of course it's reminiscent of the Level 5 Ghibli collaborations for Ni no Kuni, which I think turned out really well. So, you know, it's exciting, again, to see them innovate and to realize that interactive narratives aren't, you know, the future of storytelling, but it's another present form that's already really important to a lot of people and relevant and a great way to reach a different audience and demographic and just tell stories in a unique new way. So no matter how cynical you are, I think it's a bit of a stretch to consider Chicken Run 2 or any other projects that Aardman is working on right now as just sort of a quick cash grab. The most cynical that I'm going to get about this project is that I suspect some of the motivation from a commercial standpoint isn't based at all on the kind of current market demand for this particular type of family film or for a sequel of Chicken Run, as it is perhaps Aardman's recognition that developing and sustaining their own intellectual property, their own characters, as sort of a long-term investment makes a lot of sense for the company. And this is all just speculation, but I feel like maybe that's why so many of their previous projects are not standalone projects, because Aardman, I think, like a lot of other studios, realizes that the entertainment companies that actually amass the most value monetarily are the ones that create lovable characters that can carry entire franchises and, you know, cinematic universes and whatnot on for decades and decades. If every single project you're creating is entirely new and original IP, that's fantastic, but very few of those companies are able to compete with someone like, you know, Marvel or Lucas or Disney that really derives most of their strength from characters that people have grown up with through repeated outings, through repeated stories and experiences, and have built a stronger connection to through the sheer quantity, through how prolific those series are. In other words, whether or not Chicken Run 2 is like a huge box office success, it could pay off in the long term because it'll make the Chicken Run characters and the Chicken Run brand still relevant in another 20 years instead of everyone forgetting about it. And if Aardman was ever to be evaluated for, you know, a buyout or was to try and receive more funding for any future projects, that's another asset essentially that they could potentially borrow against that's still super valuable for them. It's like those copyright or licensing agreements where if you don't exercise your exclusive right to use a particular character or story, you can essentially lose it altogether. It's not that extreme, but I feel like 20 years is about the point where, practically speaking, if you don't, you know, make another film or make another reference to an old film, people start to forget. It falls out of the public consciousness, and it's a lot harder after that point to make a callback that's really effective, that people care about. If you think about the biggest, strongest, probably most, you know, financially successful kind of characters in literary history, they're all characters that for one reason or another have never sort of, you know, been dormant for more than 20 years, whether it's Tarzan or Sherlock or, you know, Dracula. the Grimm's Tales, you know, all these things, mostly because they were in the public domain, but in some cases because a brand owned them and really ran with them, or an author, you know, used them repeatedly. They were always in the public consciousness, and there's still things being created around that mythology. So I feel like at some level that must have come into the conversation that Aardman had around whether or not to revive Chicken Run. Did they want this just to be a film from their past that was a fantastic film, or did they want it to be a franchise, to be intellectual property, that a commodity essentially that they would own forever? As to whether or not I'm personally excited for Chicken Run 2, you know, I'm excited for anything that Aardman creates, and I'm going to eagerly be awaiting more details in the trailer, and, you know, I'll watch this movie regardless, don't get me wrong. The only trepidation I have, you know, when you have a studio like Aardman that is so good at creating original characters and stories, you know, anytime that they do a sequel feels like a little bit of a waste to me, frankly. You know, it's sort of the same with Pixar. It's not to say that sequels can't be as good as the original movies, but the hardest part is creating the stories and the characters that really resonate as well as they do in the first place. And it sort of feels like you could take that and hand it to, you know, maybe a ever so slightly less talented group of creators to create a winning sequel, and they would be able to, you know, if they just don't mess too much with that formula, but at the same time aren't too afraid to innovate and are given enough creative control. And maybe that's sort of what's happening here. Maybe that's why Peter Lord and Nick Park are not working on this project, because they feel like it would be better use of their time to create a new property, an entirely new film. I suspect that's the case. And yet Aardman still sees value in creating a sequel. But I kind of feel like even these writers and the director, if they were just sort of given free rein to create something from scratch, I'm sure it would be brilliant. And that's something that personally I would be more keen to see than any sort of sequel. So it's nothing against Chicken Run. It's absolutely brilliant, and I'm very happy to see a sequel. But frankly, I would rather just see an original movie than a sequel to anything, even some of my favorite Aardman stuff like Wallace and Gromit or Pirates. But that's just my personal preference. What do you guys think? Are you excited for a Chicken Run sequel? Would you rather see Aardman do another original movie? Does it worry you that Nick Park and Peter Lord are not directly involved in the creative aspects of this movie necessarily? And do you think I'm onto something with this whole farm film conspiracy? Is there a reason that there's been less family movies with kind of darker themes featuring animals recently, or am I completely nuts? Give me some examples of movies that go against that trend. You guys are pretty good at bringing my attention to films that I've completely overlooked, and I'm counting on you to keep that up. And I realize this is not the newest news at this point. It's just something that I kind of wanted to chat about. I am very occasionally burdened with the responsibility of real work, as has been the case this past week, so I apologize for posting fewer videos, but have some exciting things coming up. I'm also curious to hear your thoughts on Aardman's latest movie, Early Man, and their first upcoming movie, Shaun the Sheep Farmageddon. And thank you guys for all the great comments the last few weeks, and thanks and welcome to my new subscribers. And if you are not amongst them and you enjoyed this video, I certainly hope you'll consider subscribing and tapping the bell for notifications for more videos on fascinating film facts through an offbeat lens. I'm Joseph, this is Buzzcuts. Thanks again for watching, and stay strange.